I would love to introduce everybody to the director of the New York Transit Museum, Conchetta Bensavenga.
Thanks, Polly. Good evening and welcome. As many of you know, I've been the director of the New York Transit Museum for the past 4 years. And as many of you also know, I came to the Transit Museum without an exceptionally deep knowledge of transit. So to say that there was a healthy dose of skepticism when I arrived is a bit of an understatement, with a very notable exception. From the very first time I met Ben Schaeffer, he was warm, welcoming, friendly, and kind. He was genuinely glad to meet me. And in turn, I was really glad to meet him. As a result, every time I saw Ben at an event, which was often, and just as often he arrived in his trademark uniform, I was met with a smile and a nod, even if we didn't get a chance to speak. He was a wonderful member of the Transit Museum community, which is why when the request came in last year to see if we would help amplify the call for convalescent plasma on social media to try and help Ben in his fight against COVID, it was a no-brainer. And we joined so many others in trying to get Ben the help he desperately needed. I'm just sorry we weren't successful. Ben's faith played an enormous role in his life. And in his faith tradition, when someone passes, there is a beautiful phrase, may his memory be a blessing. I can't really think of a more appropriate way for the Transit Museum to celebrate Ben's memory than by sharing an evening talking transit. We are so grateful to Lisa for starting this conversation, and we are truly honored to host you all this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Conchetta. And now I would like to introduce Lisa Smid, who's going to give us some remarks about her dear Ben.
Okay, can everyone hear me all right? I'll start out by asking a bit of New York subway trivia. Who swiped the first New York Metro card? The first person who swiped a Metro card is the guy we're talking about today, Benjamin W. Schaeffer. He showed up far in advance to be the first in line at midnight. Ben was passionate about all things transit. He was, in fact, a walking encyclopedia of trains, subways, and barges. With no advanced degree, he had the knowledge of a PhD when it came to national and local transit infrastructure. Ben documented the railways and barges of New York for over 40 years. His peers call him one of the foremost historians of rail marine freight operations in New York City, as well as in New York City transit operations. Ben, who was capable of so many things, was a proud conductor by choice. He was born 59 years ago today and grew up in South Brooklyn. A born rail fan, he didn't stop at playing with trains. He was a shy kid. He spent most of his childhood riding his bike along the Brooklyn waterfront and terminals, sometimes alone, sometimes with his friend Larry. They rode their bikes to the freight trains that ran on the Bay Ridge line and down to the Brooklyn waterfront Bush terminal. The train crew permitted the boys, who were 12 or 13 at the time, to ride with them. When Ben was 15, he was doing railfan explorations on his own, this time with his parents' permission. He convinced his mom and dad to sign a waiver allowing him to walk through the area train yards. When he got a camera, he began documenting the railways in earnest. In high school, Ben knew he wanted to ride trains full time. He wrote major rail organizations for advice on how to go about becoming a conductor. Long Island Railroad wrote back, and he proudly kept that letter all his life. He attended a few different colleges to study public administration. He interned with the New York Transit Museum and later the MTA track department, ultimately getting an associate's degree at Kingsborough, where he was a proud and active member of the Alumni Association decades after his school days were past. After graduation, conductor time. But his career path didn't follow a straight line. He took a civil service exam to be a token clerk, which didn't materialize. He hoped he might be the Transit Authority's chief archivist. What did happen is that he left transit for a time to work for the city's Human Resources Administration and later returned to the conductor's booth where he stayed for the long haul, going on to serve 22 distinguished years with the New York MTA. Around this time, the subways evolved and updated, and Ben made a point of saving old equipment about to be thrown out. Whenever he saw construction going on in the subway system, he'd ask the foreman what they planned to do with all the straps, turnstiles, fans, etc. If they were getting scrapped, usually the case, Ben took it home and often donated them or swapped them at collectors' clubs. He is responsible for rescuing a wealth of New York's underground history that would otherwise be lost to us. When he had more disposable income later, he'd give time and money toward preserving a historic East River caboose and other pieces of transit history and support train and trolley preservation. He had an eye for what would become valuable in later years. This included both the literal memorabilia he was preserving and the lessons it might teach. Ben told the Daily News in 1992, "I feel it's important for the MTA to establish a living archive so future managers can see what worked and what didn't work in the past." Ben's the author of New York Subways in Color, Volume 1, and edited the New York Railroad Enthusiast newsletter. His acumen earned him a spot on the Transit Advisory Committee for Brooklyn Borough President Howard Golden. And that wouldn't be his last involvement in politics. Ben was active in Bay Democrats, served as a Jewish community consultant for a city council candidate he believed in, his friend Anthony Beckford. He was a fixture at the meetings of Community Board 14, and he was a treasurer of Brooklyn's 70th Precinct Community Council. Giving back was a big deal to Ben all his life. He volunteered with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. He served on the board of Midwood Development Corporation, and one of his major volunteer commitments was the auxiliary police. He patrolled his native Midwood once a week for 28 years. His advocacy found its way into his work life. In time, he became a union shop steward and eventual vice chair for TWU Local 100. He took the role of advocating for workers very seriously. He was loyal to his union, which in turn came through for him on many occasions. One of 2 Orthodox Jews in the transit system, Ben always covered his head, and he successfully battled the MTA for the right to wear a yarmulke on the job. MTA regulations require all articles of clothing to be part of the uniform, and in the summer heat, the standard cap's too hot to wear in the warm conductor's booth. So after a battle, a yarmulke was ultimately created with the MTA insignia. Years later, when a manager required documentation for Ben to get off work for Jewish holidays, he and TWU Local 100 fought back successfully. Ben was an MTA poster boy, quite literally, volunteering to pose for a workplace poster and proudly giving copies to me and his parents. And if being a model didn't give him enough street cred, appearing in a rap video did. Along with his union co-workers, conductor Schaeffer moved to the beat and waved his hands in the air for a PSA video warning riders on subway platforms to stand back as trains approached. Ben loved talking about this as much as he loved doing it. But of all his extracurriculars, he most loved a chance to pull conductor duty on the MTA nostalgia trains. In 2012, Ben's train expertise was put to good use at work. He noticed an unusual amount of sparking on his train. A cable connecting subway cars had come loose and was hanging dangerously close to the third rail. He may have saved lives. In any case, it garnered him a nomination for the Daily News Hometown Hero Award. In 2018, a deranged passenger poured gasoline in Ben's subway car. Ben stopped the train and evacuated his passengers to safety. The MTA awarded him a Medal of Excellence for his heroism. But of all the accomplishments, that incident is the one that Ben talked about the least. A hero is someone who doesn't know he's a hero, and a professional is one who knows he is a professional to the very end. Ben knew his job, and he performed it in a stellar manner both in attention to detail and in helping passengers. Among his many community activities, Ben actively strove to start singles groups and events in the greater New York area. He networked with congregations all over the Northeast. When he went to a rally protesting against anti-Semitism, he donated his protest sign, written on the back of a pizza box, to the Museum of Jewish Heritage. Ben, in fact, loved to network with friends and strangers alike and loved to see where it would go. He got a role in the movie Carlito's Way, not on screen with Al Pacino, but as a train consultant on the movie set. He loved being the first at things and sharing breaking news. Ben was the first person to warn everyone about coronavirus. He was the first to say it would get bad. Unfortunately, it found its way into the MTA. Ben developed a cough in early March and took off work, and said later that he believed he had the virus and recovered. As dozens of coworkers got sick, he voluntarily returned to work. He contracted COVID and during Passover went to the ER at Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn, which turned out to be the epicenter of the pandemic. After 2 days of receiving oxygen, he took a turn for the worse and was intubated. Doctors recommended an experimental treatment called convalescent plasma, which is from COVID survivors who have recovered and are now symptom-free. His union put out a call from any potential donors to come forward. Ben intended to run for city council when he retired, and I kept his press clippings and notes of all his accomplishments on file in preparation for that future campaign. The irony is that instead of using them for campaign literature, I was using all those details to pitch reporters to run a story about Ben's need for plasma and a desperate attempt to get as many potential donors to Maimonides' blood bank and save his life. Or at least know we'd done everything we could. Ben was always tenacious and persistent, and he held a high bar when it came to due diligence. He did get the plasma roughly a week after the appeal went out. Numerous people came forward to donate. It's a testament to his role in the community that so many people knew him, got the word out on social media. Because convalescent plasma is experimental, donors couldn't directly donate to Ben. However, that outpouring of donors to the Maimonides blood bank likely pushed more patients in need to the top of the hospital wait list and helped many other patients in a hard-hit hospital to get this treatment sooner. Nevertheless, he passed on April 28th, 2020, 3 weeks after entering the hospital, 2 years before he planned to retire and run for city council, a day before his 58th birthday. He was one of over 150 New York MTA transit workers so far to die of COVID-19. I want Ben to be remembered more than just a character in a tragic story. He wanted people to benefit from his knowledge. And since I can't safely travel to visit his grave right now, I contacted the museum about doing a group virtual tour, normally at cost, and they graciously offered to make it public to everyone. Ben loved and supported this museum, and I can't think of a more fitting tribute than for this talk to transition from a focus on Ben into an enjoyable learning opportunity about a subject he knew so well. Wherever we may find you, Ben, you were loved and missed. Happy birthday.